Welcome to ICAN Intelligence. We're here to build a deep, exam-focused understanding of international accounting standards, and we're starting today with IAS 21. Let's get right into it. Okay, let's kick things off with a super practical problem. This is something every single global business runs into, and it's precisely the kind of problem that IAS 21 was designed to solve.
So, here's our roadmap for this deep dive. We're going to build our understanding logically, starting from the ground up, so you can see how all the pieces fit together.
All right, let's dive in. To really master any standard, you have to first get your head around the basic problem it's trying to solve. So, why do we even need IAS 21 in the first place?
Well, the standard itself tells us its purpose right from the get-go. Basically, it's the official rulebook for dealing with money when it crosses borders. Simple as that. So here's the crucial point. The entire standard, all the details, really just boils down to answering these two fundamental questions. First, which exchange rate should we be using? And second, when those rates change, how do we account for that? Everything we cover today is about answering these two things. Now, before we can account for a single transaction, we have to establish our starting point. And this right here is the absolute foundation of all foreign currency accounting. It all starts with determining the functional currency. Think of the functional currency as the economic heartbeat of the company. And here's a key tip. It's not necessarily the currency of the country where the company is headquartered. It's all about the environment where it primarily makes and spends its cash. It is absolutely critical for your exam that you can distinguish between these two. Functional currency is a matter of fact, based on the economic reality. Presentation currency, on the other hand, is just a choice. It's the currency a company decides to present its financial statements in. So how do we actually figure this out? Well, paragraph 9 gives us our primary evidence. In any exam scenario, an examiner is going to expect you to apply these specific factors to the case. But what if those primary indicators aren't crystal clear? Well, it happens. That's when paragraphs 10 and 11 give us these additional factors to help support our judgment. This is a classic exam question designed to test your judgment. The approach the examiner wants to see is this. You need to state your conclusion clearly, giving priority to those primary indicators from paragraph 9, and then justify your choice. That's where the marks are.
Okay, so now that we've figured out our functional currency, let's see how this all builds. How do we actually handle individual day-to-day transactions that happen in a foreign currency? This distinction is the single most important rule in this section. Your accounting treatment is going to be completely different depending on whether an item is monetary or non-monetary. You have to get this right.
And you're going to follow this 3-step process every time. First, you record the transaction using the spot rate on that day. Second, at the end of the period, you retranslate your monetary items using the closing rate. And third, any difference you find goes straight to profit or loss. And this quote from paragraph 28 perfectly illustrates that core rule. For your exam, just remember this. Gains and losses on foreign currency monetary items, they always hit the P&L. Okay, we've mastered individual transactions. Now we're going to scale things up and learn how to translate the entire financial statements of a foreign subsidiary. Now, what's really interesting here is how the treatment changes. We translate the whole statement of financial position at the closing rate. But, and this is a big but, the resulting difference does not go to the P&L. This is a key difference and a really common exam topic. The translation difference gets parked in equity, in other comprehensive income, or OCI. Why? Because it's seen as an unrealized gain or loss on your investment, not a result of your day-to-day trading. So, what happens to that cumulative difference that's been sitting in OCI all this time? What happens when we finally sell or get rid of that foreign operation? The crucial point is this. When you dispose of the operation, you have to recycle that entire accumulated OCI balance to the P&L. This matches the gain or loss on the sale with all the exchange differences that have built up over the entire life of the investment. So, we've covered the mechanics. Now for the final step. Understanding how to communicate all this in the financial statements and summarizing the key takeaways for your exam. These are the absolute non-negotiable disclosures an examiner will be looking for. They're there to make sure anyone reading the financial statements can understand the real impact of foreign currency movements. This single slide really summarizes the entire standard. Seriously, if you can explain this table from memory, you have absolutely mastered the core logic of IAS 21. So I'll leave you with this one final thought. Understanding the principle behind the rules, the why,
is the real key to lasting knowledge and, of course, to succeeding in your exam. If you found this deep dive helpful, please like this video, subscribe to ICAN Intelligence for more, and let us know in the comments which IAS you want us to master next.